I have heard numerous religious leaders admonish their worshipers to comply with the desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers declare, follow this decree because integration is morally right and because the Negro is our brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which made a strange, unbiblical distinction between body and soul, between the sacred and the secular.
Thank you. You know, today I want to share with you some personal insights from rereading Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. The first insights are what most of you know, perhaps. The latter will be more of what I intuit as the deeper message that he was sharing with humanity. First, the basics. 1963, Dr. King went to Birmingham to do what he had been doing, to dramatize to that city, state, and nation that course treating African Americans as second-class citizens was immoral, indecent, and inhumane. The movement chose Birmingham because it was the largest city in Alabama, with a mayor known for harboring beliefs in segregation that were harsh and brutal. They knew this would be a challenge, but they also knew, based on previous marches and direct actions, that if Birmingham could be tamed toward justice, then all the South, perhaps even the nation, could as well. That was the strategy: go into the heart of the lion. As in the story of Daniel in the Old Testament going into the lion's den, King was calling upon his God, the universe, to triumph over this evil. The strategy was controversial. Why? Because they used children as young as 6 to protest. And they intended to fill up the jails with people, get news coverage, and show the world this sickness that was in the hearts of so many in that time and today. And the strategy worked. He expected to be arrested, and he was. Now, 1963 was an amazing year for civil rights. King's letter was a catalyst for many triumphs and tragedies. After King penned his letter in April 1963, the cause and effect, the equal and opposite reaction, that dynamic was in full effect. So let's go back 2 months after the letter. Look at what happens. In June 1963, JFK sends the National Guard to Alabama University because 2 Black students wanted to enroll. In the next 2 months, in August 1963, that was the March on Washington. And now King moves from being just a Southern local leader to now a national leader, feared even more. His power increased. And this was felt in the South 1 month later, in Birmingham, nonetheless. The 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed and those 4 little girls were murdered. Equal and opposite reaction. You know, Van Jones, he calls Trumpism and January 6th, white lash. The pattern in human history when gains are made, small gains, by minoritized groups, You can follow the trajectory in history. It's almost obvious what comes next, which is why Dr. King knew he would be assassinated. White lash, that's a sermon in and of itself. The pattern of violence that follows POC gains for equality and fairness. So the Birmingham engagement worked. It was a smart strategy. But November that year, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. What a year. But this caused Americans to pause and reflect, and would lead to a bipartisan Civil Rights Act in early 1964. It all comes with a cost. Terrorism, death threats, assassination, violence. And Dr. King would say, I should not have to march for something that should have been mine at birth. Amen. And he would also say that unmerited suffering is redemptive. So he understood that equality does not come without a cost, although it shouldn't be that way. He says that power is never conceded. It's given or taken through creative tension, nonviolent tension. And in fact, coal becomes a diamond through pressurization. So we grow this way, but I hope to share with you later this month that there are, I think, more efficient ways that society can embrace to grow with less violence, no violence, nonviolence, with no blood sacrifice. And our theme is mindfulness this month. And one of the things about this ministry is I hope we are teaching people to be mindful and reflective as they engage in difficult life circumstances and conversations. Perhaps we can discover a better way to communicate with each other, to create more fair, just, and equitable systems based in reconciliation and love. You heard two readings this morning. In the first reading, Dr. King discussed the rationale for writing his letter. And a quick fact is this letter was written in the style of an epistle, Pauline epistle in the Bible, the structure of it. And he did this purposely, King did. He was not just writing this to the local community, he was writing it to the local clergy. He spoke in a language that would give his voice power, his words power, and in a way that they would understand, speaking in this sort of religious language of an epistle. And he's explaining to the people in Alabama what his understanding of justice is. And he's using Kantian ethics, Immanuel Kant, to add nuance to his approach. He talks about means and ends. You all remember that from philosophy class. The means and ends must justify. The means, he says, must be as pure as the ends sought. If you begin your plan with an idea based on despising someone or something, you will end with despising them. If you create something moral, but are immoral in practicing it, the end will be immoral. The means and the ends and the means have to match. Be congruent, consistent, compatible. So King knew that segregation as a law would never create a justifiable and just end. Basic moral philosophy. However, moral means lead to moral ends. That is to say that if you want to end, I always say this, the karmic cycle of abuse, you must start and end with love and justice and not separation and fear. Now that's just not for civil rights, that's every one of your relationships. And then he goes on to say that a just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is also a man-made code that is out of harmony with the moral law. For King, there were natural moral laws of the universe. You don't need religion to be good. We just know. We can intuit it. The moral law of the universe. And so his was a simple dichotomy. Moral or good means that you love your neighbor, that you are inclusive, that you are fair, that you see the worth and dignity in the other person, that you love the stranger as the imago Dei, the image of God. And bad behavior equals hate and fear and exclusion as a supremacist ideology that leads to inequality. Us versus them will lead to continued pain in King's mind. And he was truly a universalist in his thinking. And his letter was responding to the fact that the local clergy was saying to him, you know, you're telling these good Christians to break the laws in Birmingham. And so King wanted to be clear. It was indeed moral to break any law that did not align itself with the larger moral law of the universe, the natural law, which he saw as freedom, total freedom for the human race, for every being on the planet. And so he challenged them, and their supposed moral laws were actually immoral in practice, using his understanding of the Bible and the New Testament as a social gospel. And as he looked at the prophets and the teachers, he noticed they broke laws for the sake of the intimate and the ultimate, which for him, the intimate and the ultimate was peace, justice, unity, and love. You know, you look at history, you know, he talked about in the reading about Adolf Hitler, but, you know, slavery was legal at one time. You could be fined, you could lose your land, you could be thrown in jail for harboring slaves. And many of our forebearers, Unitarian Universalists, they took great risks. Today, we still have to break some laws to bring about honest legislation. The law has always had a way of keeping people in their place. And the law is also necessary. We need a way that governs us fairly, that protects all people and sustains humanity. But the means and the ends must be honest and hold us each accountable in the system. It's not easy, but I do believe it's possible. Dr. King was living into his understanding of what love, equality, and freedom meant to him. Easier said than practiced, of course. Our creature comforts, money and power, modern tribalism, major stumbling blocks to our unity and freedom for humanity. Like today, many in King's time did not have a problem with the way society was structured. I mean, if you're benefiting from something, if you don't, feel the pain from a situation, a structure, then you really don't care what's happening on the other side of the street in a lot of cases. I mean, if his story is working for you, why would you want to learn about our story? When we are comfortable, it's hard to see the other. We live within our construct. It's easier to label them and look away. When the law works for you, for us, it's sometimes hard to risk our comfort. I get it. When the system is set up for you or your race, then it takes courage to grow past your understandings and some of the lies that were told to you. And when the structure benefits you and you believe in your heart that your culture or your way is superior, maybe in some ways better, but not superior. When you believe that it is superior, then it is nearly impossible to imagine or even create a better way. The people on the margins have always been those who have challenged and changed history. And so you must decide that there can be a better way. We have to decide that homogeneity, perhaps necessary in humanity's evolution, becoming less and less important in our heterogeneous march toward diversity and multiculturalism. We have to let go of notions of racial disintegration. Well, if I help them, we will lose our culture. When there are small gains by minoritized groups. You know, it's interesting. The things that hold us back are not really that different than they were in 1963. We're dealing with fear of the other, people wrestling with the continued march toward integration. You know, there are more integrated marriages now. Let me be honest. More brown babies. More integration happening in our relationships. You see it on television and TV commercials. And deep down inside, some people see this as an infection. So yes, this is about sex and procreation and racial superiority. It always has been. Don't want to mix with them. If we do, it will make us weaker. This is really what's going on. The notion that our culture is superior to yours and we are better than you. Now, I find this not just in the white community, I find it in the black community, I find it in other communities too, Asian communities too. The story is universal with humanity. We other. We other. I often thought, what would we do? How would we spend our time if we weren't talking about somebody else and othering? It'd be a lot more quiet. We'd be a lot more mindful and reflective. I mean, it's possible to call out the evils in society without othering individuals. We have a task. We have to do that. That's our call. But we can't make people the enemies. That was Dr. King's main point, so misunderstood, even by his own people. Why is that? Well, because you begin to other and you finally other enough to where your side wins. And you become the tyranny. And then the opposition begins to other, and they eventually they win, and they become the tyranny. And Dr. King said, one tyranny leads to another form of tyranny. This is what he's talking about. The vicious cycle of purgatorial abuse that we're in. Rise above the dichotomy. Rise above the notion that you are superior. There are better ideas, of course. Rise above the dualism. See the unity. We are one. And that's what the second reading you heard was all about. The white clergy, afraid of integration, what it would mean to their churches and their communities. They can read the Bible. You can read the Bible every week. You can read anything every week, rework the words, rework the narratives, say the words that keep people comfortable. But he said not enough of those sermons afflicted the comfortable. So King thought that local clergy persons were more interested in keeping their worldview by keeping the sacred and the secular separate. Because embracing a more inclusive message means change, some discomfort. It's easier to stay the same. So this is what the church and even white liberalism today, politically and religiously, faces. The fear of losing what we were, what we are. You know, when I had Awake Ministries here, I knew we were doing good work when a person who's not here anymore said, I feel like I'm losing my church. And that was at the same time that I heard people saying that they felt like they were losing their country on the political side. And it just struck me as the same message in my Unitarian Universalist church. That was because on the other side, we had a black president. Feel like I'm losing my country. And we had some black gospel music. I feel like I'm losing my church. Modern tribalism. It's on the left and the right. And so King would say, let us find the namaste. I see the divine in you. You see the divine in me. Such a simple message, hard to practice. There is no separation between the sacred and the secular, the religious and the social. The mean, they have to justify. The things we do must have pure beginnings to create lovely ends. So we have a lot of work to do in this country. I mean, you can list the problems, and you would think we haven't gotten anywhere. Voting rights, still a big issue with all the illegal redistricting. There's still housing issues, affordable housing, clean housing for people, poverty, miseducation, still issues. Ending racism, big problem still. Police brutality, stuff he was talking about. Fighting for the rights of Native Americans and the use of their natural resources. Speaking up for non-white arrivals who come across the border. You know, immigration is not a problem with Europeans, FYI. Women's rights and objectification of the divine feminine, big problem. Speaking up for GBLTQAI friends who are discriminated against, still an issue. White lash, supremacist ideology, big problem. Thing-oriented capitalism, a sickness in our culture. Hate groups still popping up, polarizing us, toxic masculinity, protecting the environment, clean, drinkable water, big issue. I could go on, and I haven't even touched the massive mental psychosis, the spiritual dis-ease in so many people. Lots to think about. It's overwhelming. What's the solution? Well, there isn't one. But one that is obvious for all of us is to keep educating ourselves, to keep being objective, to keep writing and marching and showing up and speaking out, to take your Unitarian Universalist values, those principles, with you wherever you go. I do believe that many hands make lighter work, and that you are the church's social justice. So keep doing what you do, but be aware of that temptation to other, of that temptation to point a finger on this very special MLK Sunday. I want you to think about who you are and what you are in every relationship and encounter that you have. And then I think about, what would I say today in the name of Dr. King to a person on the far right? What would I say to move them in the direction of love? Because King would want that from me. But strangely, my words to them would be pretty much the same words I share with you. And I believe my means and ends justify. And I would say something like this: what would it be like if we stopped othering? Hasn't this virus taught us anything but that we are all frail mortal creatures, just trying to survive and thrive? Life is short. Why not do what love asks you to do? Be kinder, be gentler. There's enough for all of us if we share. No matter your gender or your race, COVID has come to remind us that we are more alike than unalike. Can you try to do the next good and righteous thing with the next person you meet? Can you practice not othering or looking down on a person that does not look like you or think like you, whose thoughts do not align with yours? Try being radically hospitable. Say hello and thank you, and I appreciate you. Try being more compassionate and forgiving. Leave all that you meet with all whom you meet with a message of love. And say to them, we don't have to be afraid of each other. We can respect each other even if we disagree. Go high, not low. To you, I say this. For the rest of this day or this week, try not to say one bad thing about somebody else. Nothing bad about a practice or a culture or a people or a family member. Try it. Try practicing the 4 agreements. Let your word be impeccable. That is, speaking with integrity. Try not to take anything personally. We're all products of complex, clashing, and colliding realities, for better and worse. Don't make any assumptions. You might be totally missing something. And do your best, and that is enough. As I close, I want to say that King's message in his letter and all through the civil rights movement was simple. Treat people with civility, kindness, fairness, and equality. It really isn't anything original. It's as old as time itself. And what is happening, or what was happening in 1963, continues today. Othering is the big sin in humanity. Let the natural moral law of the universe prevail. Let this light shine, let that bell ring. But when we do that, as Dr. King reminded us, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, every state and every city, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's people, black men, black people, white people, Jews, Gentiles, Protestants, and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of that old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Amen.